Good morning. I'm Andrea McClain. I'm currently the principal of an elementary school on the Army base of Fort Knox, Kentucky. We're excited because we already had a client visit last week. It was so amazing to meet with our clients and to see that we've given them food for thought that they really appreciated and also had some critical questions about. We're also excited about the greater impact of this project because not only were our districts represented there, we also had people from Arkansas State University who are considering learning more about the Capstone model at Vanderbilt. We also had people from the Arkansas State Department of Education, to include the assistant commissioner. So to know that we are having an impact, hopefully, with our study is very exciting to us.
Joe, I'll thank our clients here today as well.
Would you guys stand?
Brian Duffy.
Class of 2010 right there, and they were amazing partners. We could not have been more fortunate with the support that the districts gave us, and especially Brian serving as the point of contact.
I'm Joe Ashby. I'm the multi-classroom leader for 3rd and 4th grade English Language Arts at Buena Vista Enhanced Optional Elementary School, which is a turnaround school in the Nashville Metro Schools, the Nashville Metro School District.
And I also work with Metro Nashville Public Schools, and my name is Richard Frank, and I work in the Learning Technology department.
Well, Joe, Richard, and I conducted an early implementation study of the new teacher evaluation system in the state of Arkansas. With the 2010 reauthorization of No Child Left Behind, states and districts were called on to develop teacher evaluation and support systems. The state of Arkansas responded to this by creating TESS, the Teacher Excellence and Support System. The purpose of TESS is to impact teachers' classroom practices and professional growth in order to improve student achievement. So in 2011, the state of Arkansas passed legislation to reform the teacher evaluation system. In 2013, the Arkansas State Legislature outlined changes to TESS and adopted Charlotte Danielson's Framework for Teaching Evaluation Instrument. As you can see, there are 4 domains: planning and preparation, classroom environment, professional responsibilities, and instruction. These 4 domains are the basis for the new teacher evaluation protocol. Scores on this new protocol range from 1 to 4, from unsatisfactory, basic, proficient, to distinguished. This protocol and the scoring rubric represent a significant departure from the legacy evaluations at most school districts in Arkansas, which were largely checklists. The nature of the pre- and post-conferences and documentation involved with TESS makes it significantly more time-intensive for both teachers and administrators than the previous system. So 2013-14 is actually a pilot year for the implementation of TESS. Schools will be required to fully implement TESS during the school year 2015-16. The state provided districts with a mandatory 3-hour PowerPoint presentation for teachers, which they presented right before the school year began in the fall of 2013. The state also provided access to 21 hours of online training modules. These training modules included videos featuring teachers' lessons, and these modules explained why each performance or aspect rated a particular rubric score. Administrators were very busy. They spent the summer of 2013 engaging in extensive online training and passing a required certification test. Our task was to examine the TESS implementation process in order to help identify areas of success as well as areas of concern. Specifically, we looked at teachers and administrators' perceptions of the TESS implementation and their capacity to deploy it. So in terms of context, our project is set in northeast Arkansas in the greater Jonesboro area, about an hour away from Memphis. There are 4 school districts in the area who invited us to examine the TESS implementation in their region. As you can see, there are some demographic differences between the 4 districts. Jonesboro and Nettleton are more diverse and larger districts, whereas Valley View and West Side are much less diverse rural districts. We developed a mixed method study and we designed interview and survey protocols for teachers and administrators after developing this preliminary conceptual framework. So this preliminary conceptual framework was based on 3 types of extant literature: early policy implementation, teacher evaluation implementation, and rural context implementation. I'm just going to give you a minute to look at that. So from there, we developed a refined conceptual framework and began to frame our task in terms of program delivery, individual capacity, and organizational capacity in these 4 districts. So program delivery encompasses communication and training on this new system. Individual capacity includes educators' personal experiences and personal levels of expertise, as well as their attitudes and beliefs about this new system. Organizational capacity refers to the time and resources available for TESS, its compatibility with competing programs, of which there were many, any alignment with human capital decisions like teacher placement at different school sites or hiring and firing decisions, and professional culture. We developed our survey and interview questions around this refined conceptual framework, so all of our interview and survey questions correspond with one of these subdomains. Thanks again to the support we had in the 4 districts, we were delighted to have the survey response rates that we did. Our initial survey was sent out in the fall, and it was incredibly useful to us. One caveat we should mention is that when we sent out the initial survey, because it was a pilot year, of course many people had not, teachers or administrators, had not yet conducted or engaged in the pre or post conferences, the observations, collection of artifacts. So that's just something we wanted to make you aware of. But this initial survey was nonetheless very helpful for us, and it informed the creation of our interview protocols that we ended up using in October with teachers and administrators. And it also informed our second survey, and that mid-year survey took place in the December-January timeframe. And again, some variation in response from district to district, but overall, we were happy to get the results that we did. We visited all 4 districts in July and August of 2013 for 2 days each time, and were able to observe TESS training events and interview convenient samples of principals and teachers. When we visited again in October, we conducted over 50 teacher interviews, sometimes as individuals, but often in pairs, as well as 17 individual principal interviews of building sites, not district administrators. We were able to interview educators in different levels of K-12 education, as you can see, to get a more balanced perspective. And our interview and survey questions were designed to probe for teachers and administrators' perceptions about the TESS implementation and their capacity to integrate it into their current assignments. Because this is a mixed methods project, we wanted to be able to conduct Pearson correlations and ANOVA statistical tests. We combined different groups of questions on our surveys in order to create different scale variables, and you can see that our cone box alpha were at respectable levels for our subdomains. And I'm going to turn this over to Joe, who's going to talk about our findings.
Our first project question was, how do teachers and administrators implement, here. Okay, so how do teachers and administrators perceive the implementation of the new teacher evaluation system? To address this project question, we developed 2 small themes. Teachers' positive perceptions is the first one. Overall, many teachers felt adequately informed about the initial implementation and the information they needed to be successful in the early stages. Also, some teachers felt that the expectations were communicated to them clearly, consistently, and frequently, and those teachers that expressed that also tended to agree that they felt adequately informed. Also, many teachers had received prior training either through a pilot study. They also, some were trained by the Danielson Consultant Group in one district and were trained as teacher leaders to go back to their schools and to be mentors for other teachers. And some had de facto training where they were trained on Pathwise, and that was a new teacher evaluation system that was also by Danielson. So there's some similarities there in the language and in the rubric. Many teachers expressed that they trusted their administrators, either due to previous instructional experience of the administrator, as well as the fact that they had full knowledge that their administrators were trained through the certification online process. In the early implementation process, many teachers turned to each other to make sense of this. And they had questions, and they addressed it to the administrator through various structures and ways. As a result, many teachers expressed that this was a potential collaborative, supportive process. There are also teacher concerns. This is our second theme within this project question. There was a difference in communication and quality of training among teachers across districts and within a district across schools. If teachers were being formally evaluated this year, they were more privy to meetings and to the process of being evaluated. So they knew more than other teachers that just got some topical information about the system. This created many issues in terms of those who were more skeptical than others and some that were more overwhelmed than others. The rubric, many teachers were unsettled about, they were told that they would vacation in 4 and live in 2 and 3. And for many teachers on the old legacy system, they were always getting high scores. So there's a shift that many teachers are experiencing that they have to grow a lot more, and that getting a 3 is not positive when the administrators are trying to express that it is. The artifact collection is a piece of this implementation process, and some schools emphasized it more than others. The schools that emphasized it more created more concerns among the teachers because of the overwhelming tedious nature of the process, where they were feeling they had to collect every little artifacts for every single subdomain, whether it was in a binder or uploading them to a Google Drive, which was also another issue in terms of tech know-how. And as a result, 40% reported that they still don't feel prepared for that. Many teachers were very uncertain on whether being evaluated formally twice in a year with a couple of informals would accurately reflect them as teachers. And so they also felt that it wouldn't help the teachers that really needed to be corrected, and it was more work for those that did good work. So many saw it as an add-on accountability. They also felt that it would interfere with other obligations and teaching responsibilities, such as lesson planning and planning strong lessons in the classroom. They felt it would interfere. And lastly, because of all the things mentioned here, they were very skeptical about whether it would have a positive impact on instruction and student achievement. And here's an example of student achievement. You'll see one later on for what they thought about how it impacted instruction. Principals' positive perceptions included, many felt prepared to implement the new system through the online training. They felt it was an improvement over past systems, as Andrea already mentioned. It had more bite to it in terms of being able to have professional conversations with their teachers and perceived it to make actual changes in teacher practices. And they also perceived that it had a positive impact that it would have a positive impact on teaching and achievement. And as already mentioned, that it would improve professional conversations with their teachers, largely because they saw it as a catalyst for teacher self-reflection. As opposed to a checklist, this would actually be a sit-down, pre- and post-conference where they would evaluate the changes in their practice and potential professional development afterwards. Concerns, of course, is the necessary time to implement it. There's a lot of different initiatives going on at the same time, and they have a lot of responsibilities, which leads to many balancing of roles. We have a shift for these administrators to be going from managers, building managers, to instructional leaders. And yet they still have to do a lot of the building manager duties, and so trying to do all that at once was a definite concern. And also the artifacts, because many teachers were overwhelmed by it and had questions about it, principals at times were concerned about how to downplay that feeling, and also how to, for themselves, know how to answer questions about what would be a good artifact for which subdomain, which is later on as a barrier. The second project question is, how is the implementation of the new teacher evaluation system shaped by teacher and school administrator capacity? You'll see a lot of relationships between what I've already mentioned, perceptions, and so a lot of those perceptions were born from the findings in the capacity. Teachers' assets to support the implementation included, as mentioned earlier, because of prior experience either with the Danielson Consultant Group or with Pathwise, which is the new teacher evaluation system, also created by Danielson. It created a familiarity with the language and with the process of being evaluated. And so many had that really increased their self-efficacy with the process. And many of those ended up being mentors for other teachers who had many questions. Also, some schools more than others had very definite timelines of professional development on how to cover each domain and how to really help the teachers understand what it looks like in the classroom and how it can change practices, while others didn't. For those that did, these timelines helped those teachers know what is expected of them in each domain and subdomain. Also, at some schools, teachers had regular opportunities during the grade level meetings and the PLC meetings to collaborate about this. When I say this, collaborate about the different domains of the rubric, what it looks like in the classroom, and the different artifacts they can collect for each of those subdomains. As you can see, the conversation at the meetings changed. They sensed that. In terms of barriers for teachers, as mentioned earlier, there are varied degrees of training and communication. This made some teachers feel like they didn't know enough about the system and have enough professional development on those subdomains to really be successful in the classroom environment, in their instruction, and even in their professional responsibilities. Also, because they didn't quite know what artifacts would merit being collected or documented for each of those subdomains.
That's a powerful, we're just reading the quote.
I know, yes. So
It stops.
you can also laugh at it too.
It stops, yeah.
But yes, and so there's an irony to this in that at least one of the domains tap into helping them create innovative lessons, but many teachers, it's a barrier. They're not necessarily seeing this all be a coalescing, a cohesive process to help them do so. They're stuck on some of the topical letter of the law things. And also some perceive that because a lot of the PD money is being channeled towards TESS, they're seeing that they're losing other important professional development that they feel they need more at this time to make them an effective teacher for their students and to drive student achievement. Administrators' assets include that because they had all this training on the subdomains and the domains, it's helping them understand what an instructional leader is, and that these are tools for them to use in their conversations for the teachers. They also have, partly related to rural context, but many of these administrators have a long-standing relationship with their teachers and a long-standing professional relationship with their teachers. So this helps them bridge into making the conversation a little more critical and difficult. That also becomes a potential barrier too, as you'll see. Also, they have a connection and commitment with their community, with the school district, and so that definitely helps them know how to address some of these issues in terms of how to have these conversations with teachers and how to frame it in such a way that it will be a positive, growth-based tool. Barriers include, for some administrators, for this one, for most administrators, it's definitely an increased time over previous systems, which then leads you to that because they also have multiple concurrent initiatives such as PARC, Common Core, New Health Insurance, which is more of a building manager thing, other initiatives such as problem-based learning, a response to intervention. All these are going on at the same time and relatively new initiatives. And so they don't know what to spend their time focusing on the most with teachers in terms of fidelity and quality. And of course, this actually relates to the first bullet in that this is this is a great barrier that they have all these other responsibilities. Some are outsourcing them, but when they outsource them, they also lose a piece of that knowledge of student culture, for example, and student discipline. Also their contact with parents. All these things are being chipped away at because they have to be in classrooms evaluating, having pre and post conferences, and it takes anywhere from 2 to 6 hours to fill out the paperwork for just one teacher. Also, there is an absence of online management system. The state's just now bringing in some tools for them to upload artifacts, to upload the observation paperwork, but administrators were starting this in the summer, so they created some of their own resources, and that was a definite barrier for them because at first they didn't know how to do that. And now with the new resources from the state, there's a lot of learning that needs to happen to make this an efficient, streamlined process, and there's still a gap here. Lastly, there's a noticeable tension among some administrators conveyed to us in the interviews that they're now, because of these new conversations with their teachers, that some of them are getting 2s and 3s. It's suddenly putting a strain on some of their relationships with the teachers because of they're going into new territories with them, with the feedback. I now bring you to our themes.
Okay, so from all these findings, basically we have 4 themes, larger themes that emerge. First being limited mandates, unlimited variations. The state, given this was a pilot year, we're going to allow a lot of autonomy to the districts to kind of determine how they were going to roll this out. Really the only requirements they had were training for administrators, about 36 hours, of course, to get certified by December of 2013, and a 3-hour face-to-face training for teachers. There was an optional 21 hours offered online training. And so the districts went about this in different ways in preparing their teachers. Some required the teachers to have their online training done by a certain date. Others did not. Some schools had pilots. They would have walkthroughs. So what it ended up playing out was that you have different teachers, not only districts approaching it differently, but schools approaching it differently, to within schools approaching it differently. Whether it was some people were on tracks that others were not. And so you saw this difference, and this really played out in teachers' perceptions and attitudes and beliefs, had a major impact on that. Second theme was this tug-of-war series of trade-offs, right? We talked about time. There needed to be decisions to be made on what am I going to focus my time on. And in the end, this one over here with hard as in the classroom, bodies in the office, this data reflects there's so much of this interaction with students. So right here is the greatly impacted or somewhat impacted. Reason, for example, Valley View is where it is. That was one of the districts who had the least amount of implementation, was taking their time a little more. So it may take some time for that to catch up. Over here with teachers, obviously explaining a lot of, I'm spending all this time on tests. I'm not having time to do these things that I value. And as you can see right here, they agree and strongly agree that it consumes time and resources that could be better spent elsewhere. Third theme, instrumentation over implementation. Teachers see these as 2 separate things, or see a test in isolation. Okay, and as a result of seeing it as isolation, it's still sort of kind of in that checklist instrumentation mode of principals just trying to organize and manage the system and not really make it meaningful. So as you can see here, this is from teachers over here thinking overall, thinking that it will have a positive impact. Of course, we have a lot of uncertain, but between the disagree and the uncertain, they still are highly skeptical that this is going to have an impact. Fourth, professional learning communities, catalyst for change. Obviously, this is your fertile ecosystem, seedbed for, where they had the PLCs already in place, where they had these collegial conversations, where they were already doing this work. Tests just fit in, and it kind of worked. Here, the shoe just didn't fit. Okay, if they did not already have these PLCs, if they didn't have the collegial relationships, if they didn't have a common planning time, they couldn't even get together, it was just an additional add-on thing. It wasn't a structure that really helped keep all of this together. So, what we did in coming up with our recommendations, we took our 8, buckets within our conceptual framework, and we aligned our research with that. And from the research, we came up with narratives, kind of the end in mind of what each of those should look like. We then, from our quantitative and qualitative, came up with narratives for each, and did a gap analysis to kind of bridge the desired situation with where they were. And what emerged from all these recommendations were basically 7, it coalesced into about 7 recommendations. The first, create strong system of communication. Where there was miscommunication, variation in communication, or lack of communication, you had a sense of concern and doubt from teachers. Okay? And so one of the recommendations would be, among many, would be to create an internal communication system that went from the state to the district to school administrators to teachers. It would be clear and consistent in terms of expectations, in terms of changes in the system. People were saying they were going all these different places trying to get answers and could never really get an answer that they were really comfortable with. You know, two doctors, three opinions, basically. The second recommendation, provide targeted and differentiated professional development. We have a lot of data that shows specifically what teachers and administrators think that they need in order to really get their arms around this. A lot of school-embedded, job-embedded professional development in terms of observing other teachers, but also very specific in terms of what we need to know more about this system. Even administrators who largely said they felt prepared, you can see here many wanted more in-depth training and refresher training on things, but not all the same. In the report, we talk a little bit about them developing their own professional learning communities or even relying on teachers and others so that they can start to do this on the job and develop those collegial relationships without being pulled out of their building for this training. Third, create opportunities for distributed leadership. As Joe had pointed out, there was a lot of kind of grassroots, informal mentorships that would go on between teachers who had had previous experience with Danielson Framework. We talk about being able to formalize those relationships a little bit more, being able to identify teachers that are not only scored distinguished, but have these sort of coaching and mentorship capacities to not only deliver professional development and work with other teachers, but maybe even to work with the administrator, although they can't evaluate, work with the administrator to kind of help them bridge that manager to instructional leader. Develop support systems, reorganize structures, maximize time. This is the one principles you're going to get the head nod from. They're just simply, there's ways to get, we talk about time management consultation, we talk about technology to streamline the process, but bottom line, especially in these districts, the rural districts, the smaller ones, where the principal wears so many hats, until they get further assistance to help them with the instructional and non-instructional tasks, the system will not only be unsustainable, but will just remain a checklist. It's just not possible. Number 5, align with existing programs, initiatives, and goals. Again, TESS was seen as competing with rather than complementing existing programs. So again, making recommendations on how do they align professional development so it is explicitly, it's not just Common Core, it's not just part, but this is the engagement portion of the rubric so that they can see how it intentionally aligns. When they go to professional development, they see how it aligns with the teacher evaluation system. Build a culture and commitment around the system. There are a lot of schools and in some of the districts, you just do not have the structures where teachers can even get together at a grade level to even meet. Not having common planning times. A lot of the structures are not there. You might have pockets of that in schools. So being able to create that time and dedicate that time and have a commitment to the time for teachers to be able to get together and do their research, to have those conversations, to reflect, to discuss, to look at data, not only in terms of the time, but the protocols need to be developed. Finally, utilize results from human capital management systems other than the system as it stands from the state of being a system that can terminate. There really are no policies or practices that are aligned with it in terms of professional growth or advancement. So beginning to look at how does it inform hiring, how does it inform your induction, how can we go back to ASU, for example, and say these are the teachers, these are some of the needs that we're seeing, what can you do in your program, all the way to career ladder, opportunities for teachers so they can see the value of where my trajectory will go when I perform and to see their colleagues, but even to teacher distribution for issues of equity for students. And we had a large response from principals who said they would like to have the opportunity to either mandate, incentivize, or have teachers volunteer to move to different grade levels or move to different schools so that students would have opportunities to be with an excellent teacher at some point in their career. So I know we've extended our time.
Spot on. Right
Spot on.
No questions, thank you.
I think
in this context of work, evaluation systems, I think, can struggle trying to serve two masters, to produce evaluations with significant amount of rigor for the human capital management decisions, but then also trying to provide diagnostic information to teachers to help them improve. And I'm curious to what extent that you feel the intent of this system was clearly communicated and is transparent. And I ask because when I was looking at the snapshot of quotes from the teachers, it seems to me that they're thinking very much from an evaluative standpoint, that that's the purpose of this system. The principals were talking a little bit about the power of conversations and that it could be diagnostic. So my first question again is, to what extent do you feel like that's clear and that the implementation is aligned to whatever purpose is really out in front, or are they actually trying to do both? And then the second follow-up question would be, how might that impact your analysis? If you're looking at the same survey from principals and teachers, but they're thinking about very different things, potentially when they answer those questions, how you might account for that.
Did impact our analysis, but in response to the first question, the discussions we had were, when all the training activities, when many of the training activities you engage in emphasize the artifact collection, the rubric scores, rather than the true heart of the system, which is be better at planning, be more prepared, engage students more, grow professionally. That was the true heart of this, but the problem was because the training so heavily emphasized the instrumentation, that's the message that people seem to have absorbed. Gotta get a 3, gotta get at least a 3, oh my gosh, I'm not a 4 anymore. This many artifacts, this much time. And so it seems that people glossed right over, oh, this is supposed to be me growing as a professional in order to impact classroom practices, collaborate better, improve student achievement, and that's exactly the conflict that we struggled with. To answer your second question, it already did play out a little bit, because one of our survey questions was that this evaluation tool was helping me have better conversations with my administrator. The administrators absolutely thought so, the teachers didn't think so at all. We're like, oh gosh, these are the same people, right? They're talking to each other.
Yeah, and also many teachers felt that the feedback from the evaluation would not impact their teaching, or were uncertain about it still.
Yep.
And we see uncertain as, we did have some degree of uncertainty, and we see that as opportunity, and that's the way we framed it for the administrators at last week as well.
And you have issues of trust that really impact that, trust in the administrator and trust in the system. And it's not so they trust their administrator can evaluate them properly, they just don't trust that they have the time to really do it properly. So there are all these other things. So even the intent of the system, I don't care what they're telling me, I see value in it, but how are they going to find time to do this? And so that trust was just kind of a huge issue.
Also, the culture of commitment built on this as well, but no one spoke to how they built this into their school vision, their school mission. No one spoke to that. And as well as the idea that, I forget the answer at the moment, but I just had it.
Well, and what you're saying dovetails into another conversation. Once you find out all of this about how people need to improve, how are these small rural districts going to have the capacity to provide differentiated PD for teachers with a wide range of different needs and wants?
One last example is the professional growth plan. It's heavily embedded in the system as the state conveys it, yet teachers did their professional growth plan, many did it in a rush the spring before the school year and never revisited it in the fall. And a big piece of this is to use that professional growth plan that they collaborated with their principal on and have to now use that in how they're being observed, and then to work on that. And the PGP's professional growth plans were rarely mentioned. Teachers didn't even look at it either.
Dr. Kanata.
Well, my question kind of builds on David's, so it's just kind of a, when you're thinking, I'm kind of wondering how you describe it as a pilot, but how piloty was it?
Yes.
And related to that, did you, and maybe this wasn't a factor, but how much of a factor was the larger kind of national conversation about teacher evaluation, a lot of attention on tenure reforms, maybe not in Arkansas, but in other states?
That was the thing. Some schools, even within the same district, were more piloty than others. And people had taken it. One school district had been an official pilot school for a couple of years, and the people there were completely comfortable with it. Very much at ease with the idea of this new thing coming on. individual principals at other schools in the different districts took it upon themselves, like, hey, TESS is coming, let's do a Danielson book study. Hey, TESS is coming, let's do some mock walkthroughs. Let's set up time to talk about this in greater depth, because then people would be more ready for the official implementation. But this pilot year looks different everywhere. Some schools chose to include everybody in the evaluation this cycle. That principal's body is really going to never leave the office or just be observing in classrooms. Other schools, I spoke with a couple principals who were putting as few as 7 teachers out of like 40 on an evaluation track this year, and the other teachers weren't part of a test style evaluation at all. And like Joe said, those people were receiving more information. So the variation of pilotiness absolutely impacted this, and we were wishing, we're dying to graduate in 2 weeks, but we wish we could revisit this in a year and find out, wow, now that more people, when it's officially happening in 2015, when everybody does it, is the hubbub gonna subside a little bit?
I think also to the national question, I think that came out most in the skepticism of teachers, because they've heard about some of the earlier stages of the Tennessee implementation. Also, they were hearing things about how some principals were not very transparent about how this is related to whether they can keep you on board or find a way to eventually release you, and that's not meant for that purpose, but teachers were conveying it that way as a worry or a concern, that they had rumors that this could be a potential way to get rid of tenured teachers. But what they didn't know was some of the details, such as they don't release you right away. You go on an intensive support plan, and you work with your principal on this for a year, and after that, then you revisit it. And so they didn't know a lot of the inside details of what it was really meant to do, but there were some rumors about that this is going to somehow chip away at tenure. And then you also saw how they felt that this would make certain teachers really hard, that were already working hard, and how this wouldn't really get rid of the teachers that shouldn't be teaching. And that was concerning. I think that was very concerning, because if they really knew the process and trusted the administrator, then it would be used to do that very thing. But they don't know enough about it, and the administrator probably hasn't been transparent enough about it to really help assure them of that. And how does the administrator go about that without maybe offending certain people that are in the group that need a lot of remedial attention?
So one thing that I think you might be interested in knowing, I thought, Marissa, that you would say this, is that many of us, including Marissa and myself and other faculty here, are doing a similar study I mentioned in class in AIDS Foundation funded, where we're looking across 8 large urban systems and charter management organizations, and many of the findings are very, very similar. So I think that might be interesting to you, and we can share some of our work. But one of the things I guess I'd like to hear from you is a little bit at a higher, now to step back from your findings.
Yes.
So some would say, of course, that putting aside the technical difficulties and whether this will improve teaching or not, that this is forcing leaders to be in schools and to know the instructional landscape, let's not even say detail, but just landscape of what's happening in their schools. And that if nothing else happens, that's going to be really positive. So can you give us your opinions about that shift? So now principals have to be in classrooms. So what are the possible upsides of that? And then I know your findings, you've mentioned some downsides, but are those really downsides?
It was really interesting speaking with principals. We had some newer principals with recent graduate school who had been involved with Pathwise. They had been other types of mentors.
Mm-hmm.
They felt really comfortable with this. They felt really comfortable with their role as an instructional leader, and expressed that they enjoyed being in classrooms often. Former literacy coaches who felt strongly that they could give good advice. And I had one very, very kind principal, former athletic coach, who said, hey, I'm not a curriculum guru. I struggle. I just passed my certification test. The next day I watched another video with the teachers, and I rated something a 4 that was supposed to be a 1. So this is going to force some of the teachers with a less scholarly teaching background to step up their game. And it's been very stressful for them, and you have to wonder, the teachers are gonna think, my goodness, I'm getting advice from someone who isn't speaking with a broad range of pedagogical content knowledge in my area. I'm not gonna listen.
Yeah, my response to that would be, there are so many levers that can be pulled, and this isn't just, it's going to become there's so much that is invested in managing this and implementing this, that my concern is that there are so many things that an administrator will lose in the process of being able to keep their eye on. And so it's almost like, in order for this to work how it's intended to work and not just become a checklist of running around and talking with teachers and sitting down and having these conversations, in order to be able to do that, a lot of things are going to go on the wayside. And so my concern would be what can go on the wayside, and do we need to look then at a traditional way we look at administrators and find ways to organize schools in ways that where you might have someone who handles operations or handles these other duties. Because the way that we look at our traditional administrator, especially somewhere like in Jonesboro, to be able to make that structural shift where they can handle all these things, is going to diminish everything that they have to do, instructional and non-instructional.
So have you looked at other systems? I'm thinking about the first Capstone project where they, I know you're graduating, so don't worry about that. I'm just thinking out loud. Because in our system, in our study, we've seen a lot of variations, and some systems are very creatively addressing that. Part of it has to do with the data systems that are available. Part of it has to do with how they're deploying instructional coaches, intervention specialists.
Can I ask you about the size of these districts too? Are these larger districts with a lot more resources and
that's what we found in the rural
flexibility?
context literature, that you've got a tiny district with one superintendent, maybe one assistant superintendent, and principals wearing a lot of hats, so they don't have a central office. They would love to have more support.
But I will say this about that. We did look into that. For example, PAR, peer assisted, the peer the R stands for review. Thank you. Peer assistance review, and for example in Cincinnati, and they are using systems where they're deploying teacher leaders to help in this process. And that's not an option here yet. But what it did help us in our recommendations in terms of this idea of distributed leadership, in terms of building teacher leaders on grade levels that could help sometimes be the mouthpiece for the administrator on many pieces of the system, with the exception of actually evaluating the teachers. However, that's not to say that can't happen in the future as they get more creative with this. And it did find a place in our report, some of these other things that other people are doing.
Time and training are substantial pieces here, right? And you directed your second recommendation towards it, the differentiated training. They're doing online training. Part of the concept there is individualization. How many teachers and administrators are actually participating or involved in online training?
Well, it's funny. We conducted we were completely involved in the study, and last week we went to Jonesboro to present, and we found out for the first time that the 21-hour training provided by the state was optional.
For the teachers?
Yeah, for the teachers. We were completely convinced, the teachers we spoke with, the administrators we spoke with, everyone had translated that message as, you not only do the 3-hour face-to-face PowerPoint, you've got to do this 21 hours of training. And someone from the state said, well, it was optional, but we think people took it the wrong way. Like, you think? Yeah.
And they suggested to do 21 hours if their school had no professional development
Right.
yet on it.
But in terms of moving forward, as we move forward, there's 4 domains and so many subdomains within each domain, and you've got smaller districts with a lot of great, hardworking individuals. Are they going to have the capacity and the time to say, okay, these are the teachers at all of our schools who need extra help with student engagement. What are we going to get pulled together for them? They don't have the curriculum specialists at the district office the way that Little Rock might have, or the way that Nashville might have. So we're more concerned about the future professional development. Like, yeah, you've been observed. We've got some concern. You're doing great in this. We've got some concerns here. Are we going to be able to target teachers and improve them professionally in differentiated ways in a smaller district without as many resources?
And I will say that was a barrier that some administrators felt, that they were just still a little uncertain about how to provide effective feedback after they followed the rubric results, and then how to know which related professional development they should give that teacher. And that goes back to your instructional leader. That's a gap still. And so that's why we've addressed that in the recommendations and provided them with the data to help them get started on that.
Thank you very much, team.